Well, welcome, Chris, to the Leaders Who Care series. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Mark. Thank you.
No, my pleasure. So this is the first time I get to chat with you as you being a married man. Um, there's no horns coming out of you, everything or nothing like that. You look pretty good, actually.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It was a great wedding and great to be back in the new year and working away on Fusion Cyber.
And the next thing parents will ask is, so when are you having a kid?
Still figuring out the timing on that. We've between us, we have four, so we'll see if we get a fifth or a sixth.
So should I be humming the Brady Bunch tune now or what? No,
There you go.
congratulations. I'm really happy for you. And it's probably, aside from having a kid, it's probably the best thing ever. So, way to go. And great place to start here is if you could, here's the key word, briefly introduce yourself. We'll get into the business stuff. If you can just say where you're from, what family looks like, your background a little bit, and maybe something you've never told anybody else you want to reveal now, stuff like that. So go for it.
Sure. So Christopher Etesse, I was born in Rochester, New York. My mom's family was from Wyndham, New York. Dad from Glens Falls, New York. So both sort of resort towns. At the end of the 70s, early 80s, my dad was an engineer, got transferred to Cincinnati, Ohio. That's where I went to high school. He actually made dental chairs and medical devices. And in fact, I was just in the dental office the other day and I saw a Ritter device. It's can only imagine how many companies it's passed through since then. But yeah, went to high school in Cincinnati. That's probably where I got my first taste of computers, both from a science teacher that was a kind of a nerd like I am, and introduced us to Apple IIe's and then eventually Macintoshes, and then went to university at the University of Kentucky, and started off in one degree and ended up in another one. And I can tell you a little bit about that in a second. But yeah, from there went to take my first job post grad school with Thompson Publishing up here in actually Maryland, Washington, D.C. area, building their learning management system. Joined a startup after that called Blackboard when there were 20 of us. Did that for about 8 years, building learning management systems. And really, over the course of the last 20 years, living in the DC area, have built a number of technology companies, mainly in workforce and training, and sort of a combination of a product technology CEO guy.
So before you go ahead, let me stop you there for a second before you tell the whole story. Is tell us a little bit about what you were like as a kid or a teenager. Were you a big reader of books, or did you watch shows on history or something? Were you playing video games? What were you like?
So I programmed some video games. So the first computer I got was a Texas Instrument TI 99 4A. Had the cassette tape, and if you didn't get the good cassette tapes at Radio Shack, it didn't last very long, and the magnet would go bad. So was outside a lot, playing with kids in the neighborhood. Just had a great childhood growing up, and probably the only downside of childhood was I was allergic to bees. In fact, about a month before kindergarten, I got stung in like one side of my face, and started kindergarten. My eye was completely swelled shut for 30 days. So I still to this day avoid bees, even after I had all that, the allergy shots and all of that.
Do you like honey?
I do. I don't eat a lot of it though.
Well, strange enough, when I was a little kid, I was allergic to bees too, and I had to stay away from them. I think I'm over that now, but I still try not to, engage with them as much as possible. So you mentioned before about universities. In your journey, you started with University of Arizona on American history.
University of Kentucky.
I'm sorry, University of Kentucky.
Which you can't bring Arizona because they, did beat us in that one championship in basketball. So
yeah, I won't say anything more. What intrigued you about the direction you went education-wise?
So coming out of high school, I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to go to law school, and when I got into the university, I was always passionate about reading about history, loved it in high school. In fact, was frustrated in high school because history only went up to, I think we just touched on sort of the end of the Korean War, beginning of Vietnam. Always wanted to learn more. And so was probably attracted to, books like Tom Clancy and others. But really just understanding how the world works and, what's happened in the past and how we can learn for that in the future. So was in American history, had a ton of great classes. In fact, one of my best professors was Dr. Fawn Gordon, was the history of African Americans. Took actually 2 or 3 semesters and was really insightful because, again, it wasn't something that I had learned in middle school or high school. It was new. And so I've always been fascinated by learning something new, and taking that forward. Probably the second most interesting course I took, was supposed to be the history of women in America. Got taught by a brand new professor from UC Berkeley that had just come to the University of Kentucky and turned it into the history of women in the Soviet Union under Stalin during the Purge years and how they felt about their husbands being sent to the Gulag. So a little bit of feminist theory.
Is it a man or a woman, your professor?
It was a woman. It was a woman.
Good.
But this sort of ties into how I went from history to computer science. And it was, hey, basically the only grade in the course was write a 15-page paper about that subject. And, the University of Kentucky Library, we're talking about 1994, had very little Soviet literature, documents, books, even less, like 0 on feminist theory in the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. And so I started using a technology at the time called Gopher, which was via the internet, which was still very early, but it wasn't the browser yet. And it allowed you to search card catalogs at research universities across the Midwest. And so I actually found literature, I believe it was the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, did something back in the day called a inter-institution library transfer. And that's how I actually got materials to write the paper in that class. Wow. I think I got a pretty decent grade on it. It wasn't the best grade, but I was very much intrigued by that, like this power of being able to, hey, I'm in one state, I can search a database in another state, get information, bring it to me, and write a paper and solve things. And so after that, I think it was that summer, I started working at the computer labs on campus. They had a bunch of Next machines. So Steve Jobs' second company after Apple, the black pizza boxes and, just looking at them and what the power of it was. And then the first versions of the browser, Mosaic A2, A3, A4, et cetera. And now I was actually surfing this bigger World Wide Web. And so from that, I said, I'd applied to law school. I got into Syracuse, Ole Miss, Dayton. I wanted to be an intellectual property lawyer. Again, still having that technology slant. But I was sort of like, I think there's something to this internet. And so I walked into the computer science department at UK and I said, hey, I'd like to get a master's in computer science. And they said, well, what's your undergrad in? And I said, American history. And they started laughing. I met with one of the graduate advisors, professors, Dr. Jerzy Yaramchek. And he said, well, tell me more about yourself. And, I'd always been good at math. I'd programmed throughout, middle school and high school. And so he said, well, look, if you really want to do this, you need to take a year of post-bac, take these courses. So, I think Calc 3 and Calc 4, some of the 400 level computer science courses, and let's see how you do. And so with that, flew through them, got a teaching assistant's position, and then got my master's in computer science from the University of Kentucky in 2 years.
Sweet. So that kind of leads me to navigating your journey through a career and life from your initial education to consulting before we get beyond that. By the way, what is a conflict catcher?
So while I was in grad school, I was actually working for one business, which was basically a sports memorabilia warehouse. So they licensed all the universities, and they would sell the Cheese Hat or the Kentucky Wildcats and so forth. So I had a project there, and it was around they couldn't get their commission program to work right. Every time they ran it, it spit out different numbers, and so the salespeople were upset. And I quickly figured out that it was the person that built the program was actually using the wrong types for variables, and so it was lossy. So they might have a float, then an int, and et cetera. So I fixed that. Once I fixed that, the CEO said, "Hey, I've got a friend that is a partner in a law firm that they just started. It was and it's pretty big. In fact, the law firm at the time represented Fazoli's, which then became a big franchise in the Italian fast food concept. And to bring on new clients, they need a way to ensure that there's no conflict of interest. Do you think you could write a program that would take, the name, the business of the new client and run it through the database and make sure that they're okay to onboard this new client and go forward?" And so that's what a conflict catcher is for law firms.
So you had that on your business card, conflict catcher.
Yeah.
So continue. Thanks for clarifying that. Continuing on that, your journey towards consulting and whatnot. I expect Blackboard was a game changer for you in your career, including, and I want you to talk about this journey, including the subsequent when you rejoined Blackboard through an acquisition of Presidium.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was, I'd come to DC to work for Thompson Publishing. I built a learning management system there. I'd actually built one while I was in grad school, just so my students could get their grades, so I didn't have to carry around a grade book. And I was up in Maryland, and a friend of mine had joined Blackboard when it was like 20 employees. This is like summer of '98, and went down and was really intrigued by what they were doing. And the idea back then was, hey, there's all this technology for the back of the house, student information systems and accounting and financial systems, but no one's looking at how do we make things easier for the front of the house, so for the instructors and the students. And so I joined. It was in a small, I think we were like in a old Toyota office in 19th and L. And we just grew like a rocket ship over those first 8 years. So I started as an architect, developer, standards board, product management, helped Microsoft do a large investment in the company, and ultimately ran the international services business, leaving after we went public. So 8 years later. And they say that you learn when you're at a startup, you learn 7 years during a given year, and it's absolutely true. I mean, both the good and the bad, making mistakes, having successes, and was just fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time. And so, learned from that, and but just had an incredible journey. And I just wanted to say, that last couple of years running the international business, I was flying around the world, and I was meeting with presidents of universities, ministers of education, and really understanding where this fledgling, again, this is, I guess, 2002 to 2004, this fledgling online learning atmosphere was going. Again, like when we started in '98, it was, all right, large lecture course. How do you turn in all the homework, and how do you sort the homework? How do you do a grade book? How do you do some, take-home quizzes and things like that? It was never as advanced as it became, once we hit something like the pandemic and everyone's working from home, learning from home,
Right.
on, live Zooms like this. So just very fortunate to be part of a great company and just a great learning experience.
No, I can see it as a game changer for sure. And I remember Blackboard, and it was like, man, this is super cool technology, and then the whole bit. And it's amazing how we evolved so quickly, and where we're going to go. So how did it? So you ended up leaving, I gather, and then the journey ended up with, if you will, Presidium, with a couple things in the middle of that. Um, did you, obviously, did some of that just happen? And did you join Presidium with any thoughts of Blackboard acquiring them, or how did that look?
So yeah, I did a couple things in between. I had a stint at Monster Government Solutions, was running a startup, storing all your stuff online and selectively sharing it.
Mhm.
Still a problem today. We overshare, as we all know. And joined Presidium at the beginning of 2009, just as the sort of recession kicked in. And it was sort of the perfect storm. I mean, Presidium at the time we were an outsourced IT call center for higher ed, mainly supporting Blackboard clients with password resets or how do I upload my homework and things like that. I think we were probably about 100 agents at the time, 100 call center employees. And you had a couple things going on. So you had 2 years prior to that, private student lending had ended. And so now the universities were having to bring all of that in-house, dealing with FAFSAs and student loans and dealing with that because they were federal loans now. The second thing was because of the recession, a lot of people lost their job and went back to the university. So you had like a 25, 30, maybe even larger percent increase in enrollment. So the universities were just being, overwhelmed with support issues. And so we were first in IT, and then we branched out into other technologies in IT from just the learning management system. I think we added financial aid support, enrollment management, recruiting, student services, retention. And so over the course of 2 years, the company tripled in size. We went from that 100 agents to, I think, around 2,000 agents across 2 call centers in rural Kentucky to Killeen, Texas. And we're just continuing to grow from there to really have that ability to, it was interesting because when you looked at the universities back then, financial aid was over here, student services was over here, enrollment was over here, IT support was over here. But if you look at why students struggle, why students fail at an institution, it's because they fall between those gaps, because there's not someone that's kind of holding them, holding their hand, so to speak, and figuring out, okay, you hit a wall here, how do we help you continue to go? Because it's not always someone doesn't leave the university because of a grade. It's often life gets in the way, and finding that right person, just like I found Dr. Yamchek back in the day and got me into the master's program. How do we find that right person on campus that has the institutional knowledge, will sit down and take that time and understand who you are, where you want to go, and basically open those doors. And that's a lot what we are doing with the Fusion Cyber risk management program, that in concert with Denmark Tech and University of Kentucky and others is, how do we help someone go from where they are to getting that cyber job? Now, we don't guarantee a cyber job. You can't guarantee a job, but we can train them. We can provide them the cyber range, the keyboarding exercises, and we can provide them career advice and access to our network and our network of networks, and put them in the place where they can get their foot in the door, get that first job, and move up from there. So it's kind of taken me from there with Presidium. We sold it back to Blackboard. I went there for another 2 years, and that went private with Providence Private Equity, did a few other businesses. And to get to where we are now is sort of been a culmination of a lot of experiences over the last 20 years for me.
Yeah, that's what I find fascinating when I talk to a lot of people. That you kind of have a map, but you don't have a map, and when a certain opportunity presents itself, you make a decision. So when did that, if you will, ideal light bulb, just happen, and the opportunity come on for you to lead on the mission of Fusion Cyber?
So, I mean, it happened over the last few years, actually doing other things, like building learning management systems or consulting, and having conversations where folks would say, that's great. We'd love to use it for cyber training if we could find the people. And then sort of realizing and talking to the universities where the issues are. So, if we take it back up to a, 30,000 foot level, in the 90s, when I graduated from computer science, the US graduated 75,000 undergrads annually in computer science. Today, we graduate half of that. Now, a lot of those are, you can get into a boot camp and you can start getting in that job and you can be a coder. You contrast that with, say, a nation peer state like China that graduates 2 million kids out of high school each year in cybersecurity. They've got 5 Research One universities dedicated to cybersecurity. So the equivalent to the University of North Carolina, 5 of those, they'll have another 5 by the end of the decade. And so really, in looking at it, it's sort of broken in a number of different ways. The other thing that you see is when you look at sort of the cyber programs, the faculty are really focused on theory and product development and the next algorithm and this, and it's not as focused on career development and getting that job. And even in the workforce sections of the universities, a lot of that content, those programs they offer are sort of self-paced, I like to call them books on tape or, almost the old VHS learning where, hey, here it is, go watch this and then go take a certification exam and then good luck. Yeah. But it's not like, how are we going to bring in a public-private partnership like we have with Cisco that's made a significant 7-figure donation, and other corporations are doing that, partnering with an HBCU like Denmark, a 2-year HBCU in South Carolina in 3 rural counties, and providing an online program that end-to-end do the recruiting, have the instructors, the curriculum, the virtual cyber range that's browser accessible, and then work on that career side, that placement side, to help get these folks to where they want to go. And again, it goes back to that, how do you provide sort of that white glove service? How do you make sure that you remove those obstacles, you work with them, and you help them do what they want to do?
Yeah, I think it's brilliant, with my background of executive search, leadership development, also global, you've seen so much over the years of people not really even wanting to go to college for whatever reason, or you can't afford to go to college. Who said it had to be 4 years? Why isn't it 2 years or something? And yet, going down on not just computer or technology stuff, but even trades for that matter, to talk about trades, getting into other things that you can still have, dignity in your life and make money and have a life. But with everything going on, it's what got me excited about what you guys are doing, in that it's almost like allowing people to be entrepreneurial in a way and get their education without having to go to college for whatever reason, not being judged for it, and really getting into maybe the hottest sector, technology and cyber there is, period, right now. And that's for what we call a lot of untapped talent who maybe doesn't know where to go. And this gives them an opportunity, not just a job, but a real opportunity. So can you kind of chat about that?
Yeah. So again, some of the macro trends pre-pandemic: 600,000 open cyber positions in the US, 800,000 employees in cyber in the US. Post-pandemic, we're at 1.1 million employed cyber workers, 769,000 openings. So we're not making a dent. We're not getting more interest into cybersecurity. You also have a trend where you've got the sort of the graying of cybersecurity. A lot of retirements happening. A lot of folks that are in their upper 50s and 60s that were part of that first wave that are now moving on, that have to be replaced. Veterans are a big focus of our program, especially because they have those security clearances. Of the 769,000 openings, around 200,000 require a clearance. So how do we fill those slots? And then frankly, there's a major diversity issue in cybersecurity. 78% look like you and I, Mark, white males. And, we're not going to solve the problem if we don't open up the top of the funnel there and get more folks interested and help them understand what cybersecurity is, because there's risk management framework, there's cyber defense, there's cyber offense, there's cyber for healthcare, cyber for this industry, cyber for the critical industries, critical infrastructure areas. And so, providing that education, that introduction, mentorship, and really helping them understand, what is this? Again, I go back to that, science teacher I had in 6th grade that was a nerd. that, it wasn't his job description to bring an Apple IIe into the classroom or to spend time during a science class, teaching programming, but he cared. And so that made a huge impact on my life. And that's how I got into computers, because I had that exposure. And we talk a lot in education about these magic moments between a student and a teacher. And that's really what we're trying to create. Again, we have non-credit programs in concert with the college and the university, and we'll soon have credit ones that allow for the use of veterans benefits and GI Bill and so forth. But we're not trying to replace the system, but we're trying to make the system better and more inclusive for everyone involved.
Yeah, no, I think that's spectacular. I want to ask you a question about that, but before I do, share with us a little bit, Cisco's commitment and why they think this is so important.
Sure. So, part of this comes out of their corporate commitment to social justice, but specifically, there's a section where they're focused on the historical Black colleges and universities. Again, how do they shore up their foundations, ensure that they're around for the next, in perpetuity, they don't go away. And so, if you look across higher ed, pre-pandemic, the HBCUs probably had some of the smallest endowments of any college and university. And again, an endowment that is a rainy day fund, and not having that is where institutions get in trouble. And, we've had hundreds of institutions, not just HBCUs, but hundreds of institutions that didn't survive sort of the last couple of years. And so part of this was, how do we do something that is, in benefit of an institution, working in concert with them, not replacing them, helping them get stronger and persist. And so, part of our work with Denmark was, they came to us last summer and said, hey, as part of our arrangement, I know that, there's a check that you provide us, but our bus just broke down, and we're a public institution. And if we have to go through the state to procure a new bus, it's going to take 18 to 24 months. And we rely on that for our athletic teams to get to meets. Again, they're in 3 super rural counties. We actually have, Denmark has about 360 students that live on campus in dorms. They're one of only a few 2-year institutions in the country that still have dorms. And we help them get to the grocery store and go shopping and for clothes and other goods. And so we actually went out and we bought a 35-person executive bus, leather seats. It's got USB charging ports every other row, and donated that to them. And they branded it, Black Bus. Their logo is, or their mascot is the panther. It's a purple logo, branded the outside of it. Looks incredibly sleek, and it was just a way that it's not just, hey, we're educating someone and they're getting that, certificate from Denmark. We're actually helping out that community. And I think that's the biggest thing. Like, the more that we can give back to the rural communities, and if we can take someone that's in a rural community and get them into a upper 5-figure or 6-figure job, that means everything. That's the local tax base. That's contributing to the schools. And, that's going to really, what's going to differentiate us as a country. And, frankly, the more that Starlink has been rolled out, satellite internet, fiber is getting into the rural areas, it's a real opportunity to bring jobs back into the United States from overseas in computer science, in cyber, and to rebuild some of our rural communities across the United States.
Yeah, I think that part's brilliant, and you made my job a little bit easier by somewhat answering my last question there, which well, we were even founded on the basis that leaders in their businesses can always do much better when they're doing good. And I'm glad you started expanding on how you see Fusion Cyber actually making both an economic and social impact out there in so many ways for the businesses and their employees, for their families. I know in the impacts we've been involved, in for example, if the people that go through your course and get that great job, doing something they now love, they go home, and there's 2 ways people go home. They go home and say, man, I'm so tired. The work was boring. Give me a beer. I want to watch TV. Or they go home and saying, you got to hear what I did today over at work. And you got to hear how it impacted with something we're doing next week with the community. And the kids hear that. And that's the type of impact that really can be trickled down, as you were talking about, to the families and even to the community. Don't you agree?
Well, absolutely. The referrals are key to this educational opportunity. In fact, we've got a number of folks that are veterans that are in the program that, coming out of the military, they got into working at a warehouse like Amazon or another one. But a lot of our folks are adult learners; they're career switchers, and so
Yep.
yeah, while they were in like their 20s, they could do that physical labor, but it gets harder as you get older. And so, I remember speaking with one gentleman who's like, yeah, I got a friend that's in cyber, and I just can't do this physical work every day. I want to change. Or, we've got a police officer who's a single father and he's got a daughter and wants to do something different for her. So it's everyone comes with a little bit different background. We're all different. I think that's important, but it's sort of that giving back, understanding that, and making an impact is really where our focus is and will continue to be.
Yeah, I think it's great, and you can extend that to people with disabilities. You can all sorts of things that can really make a difference. They don't have opportunities elsewhere. Last question. In LA we say keep them wanting more, because that way you get to do a sequel. So we kind of might have to be that way. But on the last question, 2021, I had a client that told me, he said, Mark, the year 2020 was the year that flew by slowly. And I thought that was a great line. And for whatever they call that, it's not an oxymoron, but whatever they call that type of thing. And so now we've got the last 3 years have been an adventure, to say the least, with all sorts of things going on. With that said, what are you most grateful for, and what are you most hopeful for?
I'm grateful for our partners. I'm grateful for the students that have entrusted their education in us, and I'm hopeful for just continuing to grow the amount of folks that we impact, that help them, fulfill their dreams, their family dreams, and help out their communities. And that's what our focus is. And frankly, we're having a lot of fun doing it. And while I'm a technologist, I've always been an educator my entire life. And, I just like improving things.
And what I would just add to that, of being most grateful and most hopeful, is your wife's name.
Very grateful to be married, and starting off 2023 with a new combined family, and just looking forward to enjoying many memories over our lifetime.
Yeah, well said. Way to go. Congrats. Thanks for
Right.
Thanks for joining us and sharing all that. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate the time today.